the Director of Programs here, and I'm very excited for tonight's event. I started talking with Monique many months ago about this, so it feels like it's been a long time in the making, and I've anticipated it for a long time, so I'm glad it's finally here. Before we get started, I want to tell you about what's on your chairs. You have an evaluation, which should only take a minute or two to fill out, and I would so appreciate it if you would take that time to do it at the end of the program tonight. It's really helpful to us to gather that information. And you also have a What's Happening flyer that tells you about other events happening at the museum. We'd love to have you come back again and again, so check that out and see what you're interested in, what you'd like to come back and see. And I hope you all have had a chance to look at our current exhibitions. They're really fantastic in my opinion, so if you haven't had a chance, we'll probably actually be closed by the end of this program, but come back and see it another time. But let's get on to the program tonight, which is a conversation about the book PUSHOUT, the Criminalization of Black Girls in School. And tonight we have Monique Morris in conversation with Nzinga Dugas, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them. Monique Morris has been working in the areas of education, civil rights, and social justice for more than 20 years. She's the co-founder of the National Black Women's Justice Institute and a 2012 Soros Justice Fellow. She has formerly served as Vice President for the Economic Programs, Advocacy, and Research at the NAACP, an advisory board member for Global Girl Media, Oakland, and a regular contributor to Ebony.com. Morris is the author of Black Stats, African Americans by the Numbers in the 21st Century. Her debut novel, Too Beautiful for Words, is a favorite among girls in detention facilities and marginalized youth across the country. She lives in the Bay Area with her husband and 2 daughters. Nzinga Dugas is the director of the African American Girls and Young Women Achievement Program at Oakland Unified School District, a program that is in its first year following the successful development of a similar program for young African American males. She previously served as the director of UC Berkeley's African American Student Development Office, where she worked for the last 11 years. In 2013-14, she was awarded a Fulbright Research Scholarship to examine how Afro-Brazilians use culture as power post-African enslavement. She is the recipient of many awards, including the UC Berkeley African American Studies Department Award for Mentoring and the Community Service Award for Outstanding Support of Students and Communities. And I also just want to say that we do, of course, have copies of PUSHOUT for sale downstairs in our store. We would love for you to purchase them, and I know Monique would love to sign it at the end of the program. So please join me in welcoming Monique Morris and Nzinga Dugas.
I'm just going to pour some more in. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to try to hold this mic, but I'm not a mic holding person. My partner, who's over to my left, usually would mic us. So that's so I can move my hands. Welcome, everybody. Let me try to hold this mic. So how's everybody doing?
Great, thank you.
That doesn't sound good. Want to try it again? How's everybody doing?
Great, thank you.
So thank you. Call and response and feed off each other. If you're not doing well, we're not doing well. So we want to welcome you and thank you all for coming here this evening. We know you had a lot of opportunity to probably do many different things, and we're so glad that you are here to join us in this conversation. And it really is a conversation about some wonderful work many of us have been doing, and that Dr. Morris has been able to kind of bring to light through her work. And so one of the things when we were talking about having this conversation was, what's the goal of this event? Why do we want to have this event? And the idea is, it's our hope through our work and our practice that we may bring the things that have been hushed in private to public. Because if we make it public, then it becomes a public responsibility. It's a public acknowledgement on a couple things. One, that there's some difficulties where we find our girls and where we find our youth. And so we need to stop pretending that that does not exist, and so that we all can see how we fit into that. And then two, there's also a lot of our girls who are actually doing well. So how do we lift them up? And how do we honor them? Because one of the things that that's interesting to both of us is that how Blackness becomes problematized. And so that we then don't see the wonderful work that our girls are doing. And I just want to say, if you just speak to my left, your right, and then my right, your left, you'll see some of the work of Monique's daughters to just actually show you just the wonderful things that our girls can do if they have the opportunity, if they have the space, if they have the encouragement, if they have community behind them. So we actually want to get right to it. Y'all ready to get right to it?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. I think just the front row, but in the back, y'all ready to get to it? Okay, so we thank you for allowing us to actually we're going to have an open conversation. We're going to take a deep dive. We're going to just go hard, okay? If y'all ready to go hard, we're ready to go hard. So I'm gonna moderate this. I'm so excited to be sitting with Monique. And so I'm just gonna start with some thoughts about where our girls are at. But before we do that, I want to start with more of a personal question, Dr. Morris, what brings you to this work?
First, let me say good evening to you.
Good evening.
And I will say it again, good evening.
Good evening.
All right, thank you. I have long been involved in this work. I think in many ways writing PUSHOUT was a deeply personal experience, but also absolutely my way of responding to a critical issue that I saw not being a part of our public discourse and that I felt was worthy of a deep exploration and a constant exploration. In many ways, I'm going to start at the end when I say that I wrote PUSHOUT really to inspire a more rigorous discussion about this issue, not as something that then is done. Like I don't see PUSHOUT as the end of it. PUSHOUT is the beginning in many ways. So I began doing this work, and the formal response to that question is that I began doing this research 4 years ago when I came across data from the U.S. Department of Education that showed that Black girls were the only group of girls who were disproportionately overrepresented in all discipline categories across the continuum. And obviously that was deeply, deeply troubling. Having gone to high-performing schools, I'm from San Francisco, I was very aware that Black girls are not the only girls that get in trouble. But we were seeing, and the Black girls are not the only girls who are doing things that might lead adults to question, what they're thinking, or who make mistakes. But consistently across the board nationally, data were revealing that Black girls were being uniquely punished for some of these things. And so certainly that, called to question what was producing the disparities. But really I want to start, almost 16 years ago when I wrote Too Beautiful for Words, and I kind of start the book with this because I think in many ways I started writing PUSHOUT at the time that I was talking to young people about Too Beautiful for Words, which is a novel, it's a street novel that I wrote about prostitution. And it was written during a time, before we were challenging notions of teen prostitution and understanding it as exploitation and other forms of abuse. And I went in to talk to some young girls, and there was a very, very young girl who was 11 years old who, basically referred to herself as a hoe, which I found deeply troubling, deeply problematic, and also, I was painfully aware that she was alone. In many spaces, that while there were smaller groups of girls who were in facilities across the country, that in many ways those girls were part of a small community that didn't really have a voice in the public discourse about their education or about what happens to them when they are responding to their conditions of oppression. And so PUSHOUT for me was a way to talk about that, to talk about sort of the pieces of the puzzle that produce conditions that can facilitate harm and that prevent many girls from completing their educational goals. And so, I wanted to participate in this conversation and challenge a lot of the framework that has been pre-existing about school to prison pipeline, or a lot of the framework that has masculinized the experience of experiencing school discipline in such a way that we could bring girls to the center and bring some of our most marginalized girls to the center of this discussion about how we produce educational systems, structures, and relationships that facilitate healing.
Thank you. You know, as I was reading the book, one of the things that struck me about it is that it's an easy read, okay? And so sometimes, I mean, it's like if you pick up the book Beloved, I got to pick that up 12 times. And I was like, just keep hanging there. I said, I can't get past the first chapter. But what I love about Dr. Morris's work is it weaves this conversation by telling stories, which is a rich part of what our culture is to tell those stories, to draw us in. And we all have stories, and I wish we would tell more of our stories, but to draw us in and then really talk about what's going on through those voices. And so I kind of want to speak to the narrative of our girls and lift up some of those responses. And so I want to take some ideas from your book and then match them with some of the things I've been doing on a listening campaign. So we're on this listening campaign around the work of Dr. Morris and Alliance for Girls. And so one of the things that is in your book is the ghettoizing Black girl identity. And so when I went to one of the schools, one of the young ladies was sharing that, this idea of we went through some rough stuff, but we still want the same opportunities. And so once they've gone through some rough things, they almost get trapped into this space and into this life, into this existence. But when I was sitting with her, she was surprised that I just actually sat on the floor with her, as opposed to standing up over her and talking to her. And so there was a little bit lifting of that trust. But when I saw her, I didn't see ghetto Black girl. I just saw a girl like, she was like, and I want to do this, and what I want to do, Miss Nzinga, I want to do this, and but her ability to be able to articulate what she wants, even though she's been through a whole bunch of stuff. So can you speak to the impact of sort of creating this very interesting identity about Black girl as ghetto, that being analogous to this idea of ghetto, and ghetto sometimes is analogous to Black. So can you just talk about that in your story?
I think we're especially seeing this conflation between inner cities, rural ghettoization, and Black identity now, in a way that I think troubles many, and that I hope inspires us to engage in deeper interrogations about these questions, this very question you're asking. The conversation for me about identities is ultimately about challenging many of the stereotypes that are assigned to Black feminine expressions. And our women have been living with them, our girls have been living with them for centuries. And so, what I try to talk about, through the telling of the stories, are the ways in which these deep-seated ideas about Black feminine expression as being, aligned with the Jezebel stereotype of being hypersexual, the Sapphire stereotype about being loud and sassy and combative, the Mammy stereotype about being, overly domestic and asexual in many ways, and this ratchet identity, which in many ways builds from this ghettoization. And this way in which there's a very limited understanding in the public sphere about the promise of Black girls, and the way in which structures of dominance and structures that can institute the isms, the racisms, the sexisms, the ageism, the ableism, et cetera, the homophobia, transphobia, all those things impact her scope of opportunity. And so, first and foremost, I believe in